She gave everything to one night, and it nearly cost her everything. What would you do if the man you trusted, the man you believed saw something in you, erased your name from the company you helped build and never looked back? Grace Ellison was quiet, capable, and devoted. A single night with the CEO she worked for changed her life in ways she never imagined. When she found out she was pregnant, she wasn't met with care or responsibility. Instead, she was given a severance check and shown the door. No explanations, no second chances, just silence. She walked out of that building carrying a cardboard box, an ultrasound photo, and a future no one believed in but her. Now imagine, you're alone, no money, a child on the way. Do you give up, or do you fight to build something from the pain? This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of resilience, of motherhood, dignity, and becoming more than what they expected you to be. If it touches something in you, leave us a comment. Subscribe to support more stories that speak to the heart. Now, let's begin where everything changed. A 5-year-old girl stepped into a room full of executives. In her hand was a crayon drawing, and on it, a face that looked far too familiar to one man in the room. She didn't knock. She didn't speak loudly. She simply appeared small, unassuming, yet somehow more powerful than the 12 men and women seated around the polished oak table. The conference room at Blake and River Foods was bathed in muted light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the late morning skyline of Charlotte, North Carolina, while soft instrumental music played beneath the hum of the projector. Bottles of imported spring water lined the table, untouched beside expensive pens and leather-bound folders. At the head of the table stood Christopher Blake, founder and CEO. He was the kind of man who wore control like a second skin. His salt and pepper hair was combed back, his navy suit pressed to precision, and his voice, measured, deep, and practiced, held the kind of weight people leaned in for. "We're entering a new era," he said, his hand gesturing toward the graph projected on the wall. "Our data logistics partner will allow us to streamline distribution from farm to shelf, increased transparency, faster fulfillment, higher margins." The room nodded. Investors took notes. A regional manager cleared her throat, ready to ask a question, and that's when the door eased open. A quiet creak, followed by the softest of footsteps. Heads turned first with curiosity, then confusion. She stood just past the threshold, 5 years old, maybe 6. A white cotton dress fell to her knees, and one of her shoes was untied. Her cheeks were pink from the summer sun, and her light blonde hair had fallen out of its braid on one side. In her small hands, she clutched a folded sheet of paper creased at the edges, colors showing faintly through. "Can I ask something?" she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. A silence stretched over the room like a held breath. Someone at the far end smiled awkwardly, assuming the child belonged to one of the employees or the building's daycare. But Christopher? He didn't smile. He stared, frozen. The little girl walked in, her shoes making soft thuds on the carpeted floor. She approached the head of the table, where the projector cast numbers and bar charts over polished wood and glass. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at him. Then, gently, she unfolded the paper. "I've been looking for this man," she said, holding up the drawing. Crayon lines, a child's hand, a woman with long brown hair, a small girl with a pink bow, and between them, a man in a suit, tall, square-shouldered, with dark hair and gray eyes. The figure was smiling. His hands were holding theirs, no name, just a family, or the idea of one. Christopher's heart stuttered in his chest. Around the table, no one spoke, Even the air seemed to stop moving. "My mommy keeps this picture in her drawer," the girl continued, her eyes locked on his. "She says he used to be important. Is it you?" The question was simple, so innocent, so devastating. Christopher couldn't find his voice. His gaze drifted from the drawing to the girl's eyes. Gray, storm gray, the same as his. He clenched the edge of the table without realizing it, fingertips whitening. One of the assistants finally rose from her chair, cheeks flushed, whispering apologies as she moved to gently take the girl's hand. But it was too late. The room had already changed. No spreadsheet, no projection, no business merger could refocus the attention now. Because this wasn't just a child, this was a ghost, a reckoning. The little girl let herself be led away, still glancing back over her shoulder. Her drawing fluttered slightly in her grasp as the doors closed softly behind her. For a long moment, no one said anything. The projector continued its slide. Christopher didn't notice. Someone cleared their throat. Another coughed, but no one knew how to ask what they were all thinking. He looked down at his notes but couldn't see the words, because all he could see were the gray eyes, the drawing, and a woman he hadn't really thought about in years. He remembered her name. He had to. Grace. The night in Charleston had been a blur champagne, music, soft light, and a conversation that had gone too deep, too fast. She had been unlike anyone else in the room, grounded, thoughtful, quiet. It had only been one night. He had told himself that 100 times. One night didn't change anything, except it had. And now, one small girl had brought it all back, in front of investors, partners, journalists. Christopher adjusted his cuffs, then slowly straightened his back. "We'll take a short break," he said, his voice low and strained. But even as people stood and shuffled toward the hallway, nobody spoke. Not about projections, not about data, not about the deal. They only whispered about the girl, the eyes, the drawing, and the man who had no answer. Christopher remained at the head of the table, alone. The drawing was gone, but its outline lingered in his memory, in the stillness, and in the gaze of every person who had just seen what he had tried for years to forget. To understand why this little girl's voice shook a millionaire to the core, we have to go back 6 years. She had never been to Charleston before. That night, she wore a second-hand dress and a heart too open. The city shimmered like something out of a dream. Cobblestone streets glistened with the day's last rain, and string lights floated between balconies like low-hanging stars. Horse-drawn carriages clipped past the sidewalks, and live jazz hummed from a courtyard down the block. Grace Ellison, 28, stepped carefully out of the shuttle van, gripping a small black clutch she'd borrowed from her roommate. Her dress was thrifted navy blue with slightly uneven stitching at the waist, but she had ironed it 3 times and checked her reflection twice before leaving. The hotel ballroom stood tall and glowing. Tonight was the annual Blake and River Foods Gala, an event she'd only heard about in office whispers and company emails filled with gold-trimmed font. She had never expected to be invited, but this year, for reasons unknown to her, someone in HR had added her name to the list. Inside, the room pulsed with warm laughter and muted piano music. Glasses clinked. Servers glided through the crowd with trays of scallops and sparkling wine. And at the center of it all, commanding without trying, was Christopher Blake. She had seen him many times before. From afar, in meetings, on posters, never this close. He looked younger in person, or maybe just less polished. His hair wasn't perfectly combed back tonight. There was a looseness in the way he stood, a weariness behind his eyes. Grace kept near the edge of the room, nursing a single glass of sparkling water. She exchanged a few words with the accounting team, nodded politely to someone from marketing, and planned her quiet exit around 9:30. But Christopher noticed her. He shouldn't have. She wasn't wearing red. She wasn't laughing loudly. She wasn't anyone important. But just before the band started their second set, he walked across the room and stood in front of her. "I don't think we've met," he said, offering his hand. His voice was smooth, but not flirtatious. Curious, almost. "I'm Grace," she replied, her voice barely above the music. "Administrative assistant. I handle interdepartmental schedules." He smiled. "That's probably why I've never had a double booking in 2 years. You're the quiet one behind the curtain." She laughed, softly, something like that. They didn't talk about work after that, not really. Instead, they moved toward the terrace when the ballroom grew too loud. The night air was gentle, and the scent of gardenias drifted from the planters. They talked about music, childhood, the books they loved, and the places they wished they'd gone. Grace didn't feel like an assistant out there. She felt like someone being seen. And Christopher, for a man who had built a corporate empire from the ground up, he seemed oddly drawn to stillness, to honesty, as though he craved it, quietly. At some point, he touched her elbow lightly when she laughed, not possessively, just tenderly. At some point, she stopped worrying about whether her heels hurt. At some point, the city melted away. They ended up walking along the waterfront near midnight, her clutch in one hand, his jacket over her shoulders. They sat on a bench by the water. Silence stretched between them, soft and unafraid. "I usually don't talk like this," she said, glancing down. "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to." Later, too late for logic, too early for regret, Grace followed him to his suite. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. It was slow and quiet and full of things not said aloud. In the soft lamplight, he traced a scar on her wrist she had gotten from moving boxes years ago. She brushed a loose hair from his forehead and asked nothing about his life. They didn't promise anything, but Grace, in her soft and human way, had hoped. When morning came, the sun slipped through the sheer curtains in slanted gold. She woke alone in the bed, still wrapped in the duvet. The room smelled faintly of bergamot and linen spray. Christopher stood near the window, dressed again, tie in hand, briefcase zipped. He looked back at her with something unreadable in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. He walked over, placed a folded note on the nightstand, and hesitated for half a breath. "Good luck." And then he left. The door clicked softly behind him. Grace stared at the ceiling, the white paint speckled with light. She didn't cry. Not then. She simply lay there for a long time, listening to the distant echo of hotel doors opening and closing down the hallway. Later, when she checked out, she tucked the note in her purse without reading it again. She went back to Asheville that night, back to her apartment, back to emails and invoices and printer jams, back to being invisible. But 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. She stood in the narrow bathroom of her apartment, barefoot on the tile floor, holding a small white stick in both hands. Her fingers trembled. Her heart beat somewhere between her ribs and her throat. The plus sign appeared slowly, faint, then darker. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, her knees touching. The world felt suddenly too quiet. Outside, a siren passed, a neighbor's dog barked, a faucet somewhere dripped without urgency. Grace looked down at the test in her hand and whispered the words no one else would hear. Oh, just that. Because when something shifts your entire life, there's no need for dramatic sentences. Just that one syllable. Soft. Full of everything. 2 weeks later, Grace took a test that changed everything. She thought he'd at least ask if she was okay. He didn't. The message she sent was simple, clear, respectful. Christopher, can we meet privately? I have something personal I need to discuss. It's important. He replied within an hour. Conference room 2B. After lunch. No smiley face. No question mark. Just cold logistics. Grace sat at her desk that morning with a heart that beat like paper being torn slow, soft, inevitable. Her palms were damp. She checked her reflection twice. The stick in her bathroom had said yes twice, and the appointment at the clinic had confirmed it. 6 weeks along. 6 weeks wasn't much, but it was real. And somewhere inside her, a tiny life had already started to claim space. She didn't expect him to be happy, but she thought he might at least pause, listen, ask something. She stepped into the room at 1:03. Christopher was already there, seated, notepad in hand, as if prepping for a quarterly review. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, it was only briefly. What's on your mind, Grace? She sat across from him, folded her hands in her lap. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. 6 weeks. It's yours. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They just hung in the air, heavier than anything the walls had ever held. Christopher's pen stilled. He didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. When he did, his voice was measured, controlled. I see. Grace waited. For a question. For a flicker of surprise. For a single breath of human emotion. None came. I don't think it's wise, he said finally, for this to become a matter of company knowledge. She blinked. I'm not asking for anything, she said, her voice tightening. I just thought you should know. I don't expect support, just honesty, respect. Christopher reached into his folder, pulled out an envelope, thick, sealed. I had this prepared, he said, just in case. Grace stared at it. She didn't touch it. What is that? He slid it across the table. Severance. $75,000. That should cover the transition. Her throat closed. Transition. He leaned back. I think it's best for both of us and the company if you step away quietly. No press, no HR drama. There it was. Not just rejection. Erasure. The man who had whispered secrets into her hair 2 weeks ago was now managing her like a PR risk. Grace stood slowly. I thought, she began, then stopped. What had she thought? That the man who disappeared before breakfast would suddenly become a partner, a father. She looked down at the envelope. Still untouched, still unopened. She didn't take it. Not yet. I'll need time, she said. Christopher nodded once, as if confirming a memo. 1 week. Then we move forward. She returned to her desk that afternoon with eyes dry but burning. People walked past, laughed in the break room, printed reports. The world moved forward, but something inside her stayed stuck. For 6 days, she worked as if nothing had changed. She scheduled meetings, answered emails, filled out forms. She folded the sonogram photo into her notebook black and white, fuzzy, but unmistakably alive. On the 7th day, her name appeared in the internal announcement. Grace Ellison has chosen to step down from her role. We thank her for her service. No reason, no explanation, no dignity. But the worst was still to come. That Friday morning, she was asked to attend the weekly all-staff briefing. She stood at the back of the room, holding a small cardboard box, her personal items packed neatly, a framed photo of her younger brother, a potted succulent, a coffee mug with faded script. Christopher walked in late, took the mic, cleared his throat. "I want to address an unfortunate situation," he began. An internal boundary was crossed, an ethical lapse. And while we won't name names, I want everyone here to know we take professionalism seriously. Heads turned subtly toward her. Whispers flickered. And then the meeting moved on. She didn't cry in the elevator or the lobby. She waited until she reached the parking lot where no one could see. Then she sat on the curb, in her second-hand flats, holding a box full of things that used to mean something. She opened it and slipped the sonogram photo on top. That tiny form, floating, unaware. She ran her finger along the curve of the head. "You're still mine," she whispered. "They don't get to take that." She left the building without saying goodbye. No one stopped her. No one asked why, just like she knew they wouldn't. She went home, where nobody asked how she was, because nobody knew. There's a kind of quiet in the mountains that doesn't soothe you, it swallows you. When Grace returned to Asheville, it wasn't by choice. It was the only place she could go. The house she moved into had been her grandmother's. 2 bedrooms, sagging porch, one window stuck halfway shut. It smelled of mothballs and old lemon polish, but at least it was hers. No rent, no questions. The neighbors were kind but distant, the way small-town people are when life teaches them to mind their own business. Grace didn't explain where she'd come from or why her belly had started to show before a husband appeared. She got work wherever she could. Weekdays at the diner on Route 70, weekends helping at a florist who paid under the table. The tips were small, but they stretched. She bought beans in bulk, canned tomatoes when they were on sale, saved every coin in a cracked mason jar labeled for baby. The pregnancy wasn't kind to her. There were long nights of nausea, short breaths after every hill, and a dull ache in her lower back that never quite left. She didn't complain. She just kept going. By her 7th month, she had started teaching herself to code. It began one night when sleep wouldn't come. She opened an old laptop, a graduation gift from college, and found a free online course about software logic. At first, it made no sense. Then, oddly, it did. There was comfort in the rules, in the predictability. If you gave the right input, you got the right output. Life wasn't like that. But code listened. She took notes on the back of diner receipts, practiced during her breaks. And slowly, line by line, something began to form. Lily came early, too early. It was a stormy night in late September when Grace's water broke on the kitchen floor. There was no one to call, no partner, no friend nearby. She drove herself to the county hospital, gripping the steering wheel with one hand and her belly with the other, whispering, hold on," as rain battered the windshield. Lily arrived 4 hours later, 3 pounds, 4 ounces, a cry like a whisper. She was rushed to the NICU, tubes, beeping monitors, a clear plastic crib that looked more like a science experiment than a cradle. Grace sat beside it for hours, days, her hand pressed gently against the glass. "You're strong," she whispered, "stronger than me." The nurses admired her silence. They didn't know it was the only thing keeping her from breaking. When Lily was finally stable enough to come home, Grace wrapped her in 2 knitted blankets and carried her out like she was made of glass. The nursery wasn't ready. There was no nursery. Just a corner of Grace's room with a used bassinet, a mobile missing 1 star, and a pile of folded clothes donated by the woman at the florist. She rocked Lily with one hand and typed with the other. At night, when Lily slept. Grace coded. She learned about food supply chains, independent grocers, rural delivery systems. She began sketching an idea for an app, one that could help small food vendors optimize inventory, reduce waste, and survive in a market dominated by giants. It wasn't a company yet, just a dream with a loading screen. But it was something. And something was more than nothing. Winter came hard that year. Snow arrived early and stayed longer than anyone wanted. One night in December, the wind howled against the house like it had a score to settle. The power blinked twice, then vanished. Total darkness. No heat. No sound. Grace lit 2 candles and wrapped Lily in every blanket she had. The baby whimpered, confused by the sudden cold. Grace held her close, chest to chest, heartbeat to heartbeat. Then she lit a fire in the old stove using sticks from the backyard, boiled water for a bottle, and sat cross-legged on the floor, her back aching, laptop balanced on her knees, battery running low. She kept coding, one line at a time, fingers stiff, eyes burning. The only light came from the screen and the soft flicker of the flame. Outside, snow fell like silence. Inside, something was being built, not just a program, but a path. She didn't know if it would work, didn't know if anyone would care. But she kept typing, because in that moment, with a baby against her chest and no one to witness, she had a reason. And that reason was breathing softly in her arms. She coded in silence, with a baby on her chest and pain in her spine. She had $97, one baby, and a code that no one had seen. Grace stared at the email 3 times before believing it was real. It had landed in her inbox at 2:12 a.m. A time when most good news didn't dare to arrive. We're currently reviewing applicants for our Single Mother Founders Grant. Your concept caught our attention. If you're able to present in person, we'd love to hear more. Austin Women in Tech Initiative. Austin? It might as well have been a world away. But the firewood was running low. The coding hours were outpacing the tips she made at the diner, and Lily had outgrown the last donated onesie. Grace knew this might be the only window that would ever open. She packed what she could, 1 diaper bag, 2 outfits, her laptop, and a flash drive containing the first working prototype of her app. The name she gave it was Simple Route Map. It connected rural vendors, farmers markets, and small grocers, streamlining supply, matching needs with resources in real time. No venture capital, no big team, just one mother, one idea, and code written by flashlight during bottle feeds. She bought the bus tickets 2 days later. $87 round trip from Asheville to Austin. That left her $10.13. It had to be enough. They left before dawn. Lily slept through the first few hours, bundled against Grace's chest in a second-hand baby carrier. The bus rattled gently as it passed the edges of Tennessee, the sun rising like a shy promise in the east. At each stop, Grace checked Lily's cheeks, her temperature, her breathing. By the time they reached Little Rock, Lily's forehead had grown warm. Too warm. Grace panicked silently. She whispered lullabies in a cracked voice and dabbed her daughter's face with a cool rag soaked in bottled water. By Dallas, Lily had a full-blown fever. Grace's hand shook as she cradled her in the back seat of the bus. The other passengers kept to themselves, headphones in, eyes down, except for one woman. She looked to be in her 60s, her gray hair braided neatly under a wide-brimmed hat. She noticed the tremble in Grace's hands, the worry in her eyes. "You a long way from home?" she asked softly. Grace nodded, too tired to pretend. "Baby's warm," the woman said, placing her palm gently on Lily's forehead. "You need rest. When we stop, I'll help." And she did. At the next layover, The woman walked Grace to a 24-hour pharmacy, bought infant fever reducer, sat beside her in the station while Lily sipped formula and began to cool. She didn't ask for a thank you, just smiled and said, "Some journeys you're not supposed to take alone." Grace never learned her name, but she never forgot her. They arrived in Austin the next afternoon, exhausted, but breathing. Grace held Lily close and stepped off the bus into dry Texas air. She had no hotel, no friend in town, but she had directions to a community space Maven Hall where the grant team was holding interviews. The receptionist gave her a puzzled look at first. "You brought your baby, yes," Grace said. "She comes with the story." They let her present in a small side room. No podium, no slideshow. Just Grace, her laptop, and the quiet fire of someone who had nothing left to lose. She explained Route Map. She showed how the algorithm connected underserved food vendors in real time. She explained how her childhood in Western North Carolina gave her the insight, how coding became her rope out of the dark, how Lily was her reason to hold it tight. She didn't pitch like a startup founder. She spoke like a mother, clear, steady, full of quiet conviction. They said they'd be in touch. She nodded, held Lily, and stepped back into the hallway, unsure if she had done enough. That night, she stayed at a shelter on the east side. Clean, safe. There was a cot, warm soup, and a woman who offered to rock Lily while Grace rested her eyes. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about North Carolina, about the snow, about the firelight reflecting off her screen, about the hours she had doubted it would ever matter. Then her phone buzzed. A Texas number. She stepped into the hallway barefoot, heart thudding. Grace. "Yes, this is Tara from the grant committee. We just reviewed your demo. We think you're onto something." Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. Her knees bent slowly, but she didn't fall. "Can you come in tomorrow?" The voice continued. "We want to talk next steps. You're not just a finalist, you're a priority." Grace closed her eyes. Lily stirred in the other room, a soft cry that sounded more like a sigh. She didn't know it yet, but she had just opened a new chapter for both of them. From a rented garage, a single mom quietly launched a software that would change food distribution. It wasn't glamorous. The garage had oil stains in the corners, a rusted water heater in the back, and insulation that barely kept the cold out. But it had an outlet. Wi-Fi from the neighbor's router with permission, and a fold-out table just big enough for a laptop and a notepad. It was enough. Grace named her company Clear Harvest. The idea was simple but powerful: help small, independent grocers and farm vendors track their supply, reduce waste, and find better distribution paths in real time. What the big chains had in million-dollar dashboards, she now brought to mom-and-pop shops with a $19 monthly plan and an interface even her grandmother could use. She coded at night, held Lily on her lap during customer calls, did quality testing during nap time, wrote proposals while stirring macaroni on the stove. She launched a test version in the first month. By month 3, 5 local stores had signed on. They weren't tech-savvy, but they believed in her. And more importantly, they believed in the way she listened without ego, without jargon. Just a woman trying to make something that actually helped. Then came the pitch video. A small nonprofit in Austin had asked Grace to record a 90-second intro to share with early-stage angel investors. She filmed it in her garage, her hair in a low bun, Lily giggling softly in the background as Grace spoke directly to camera. "I didn't come from money," she said. "I came from minimum wage, from food stamps, from holding my daughter through the flu while debugging code at 2 a.m. I didn't build this to get rich. I built it because I knew what it felt like to have nothing on the shelves. The video didn't go viral, but it did get passed around, and 2 weeks later, Clear Harvest closed its first seed round $120,000 from 2 angel investors who said they weren't investing in code, but in courage, Grace cried in the bathroom where no one could see. Then she picked up Lily, ordered Thai takeout, and let her daughter scribble all over the investor paperwork with a crayon. One night, Grace boiled instant noodles for dinner and poured them into 2 mismatched bowls. Lily sat on a milk crate beside her. They ate in silence for a moment, steam fogging up the tiny kitchen window. Then Lily tugged her sleeve. "Mommy," she said, holding up a paper. It was a drawing. Stick figures, one big, one small. The big one had a red cape. The small one was smiling. "That's you," Lily said proudly. "You're Superwoman." Grace blinked twice, set down her spoon, and pulled her daughter into her lap. For a long time, they just sat there, wrapped in silence and noodle steam, while something unspoken settled gently between them. The press came slowly. A local paper ran a feature titled, "The Mom in the Garage Who Might Fix Food Supply." Then a podcast interview. Then a mention in a national business newsletter for women in tech. Grace didn't chase any of it. She barely had time. Between bug fixes, customer support, and Lily's preschool enrollment, she ran on adrenaline and coffee she couldn't afford to spill. 3 months later, she received an email. The subject line read, "National Food Tech Conference, Keynote Invite." She thought it was spam, almost deleted it, but it was real. A full invitation, paid travel, prime speaking slot. They wanted her to share how Clear Harvest was helping underserved communities, how she'd built it from nothing, how she'd turned code into impact. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she picked up Lily and danced around the living room, both of them barefoot, arms tangled, laughter rising above the sound of the neighbor's lawnmower. It felt like a beginning, like something was finally shifting in her favor. But she didn't know the man who fired her would be there, too. She stepped into the same city where her name had once been erased from a wall. Charlotte hadn't changed much. Tall glass buildings still caught the morning sun like polished teeth. Coffee shops still filled with consultants tapping on laptops and baristas calling out names too fast. And the convention center still buzzed with the overconfidence of 1,000 suits. But Grace had changed. She wore soft gray slacks, a navy blouse, and the quiet confidence of someone who had built something with her own 2 hands. In one hand, she held a conference badge. In the other, a small hand gripped hers tightly. Lily, now 5, walked proudly beside her in light-up sneakers and a backpack covered in dinosaur stickers. Tucked in that backpack was her newest drawing folded into quarters, edges curled. Grace had considered leaving Lily with a sitter, but something told her this moment was for both of them. The lobby inside was lined with booths, colorful banners, corporate swag, logo pens, and reusable tote bags. And there it was, near the center aisle. Impossible to miss Blake and River Foods, clean branding, polished staff. A towering screen cycling through sustainable sourcing claims and mission statements. Grace's breath caught, just for a second. Then she kept walking. She didn't stop at their booth, didn't glance to see if he was there. Instead, she guided Lily toward the back hallway, where the keynote prep rooms were. 30 minutes later, she stood backstage. The MC's voice echoed from the main stage, introducing her with polite applause. Next up, we're honored to welcome the founder of Clear Harvest, a platform changing the way small vendors access the food supply chain. Grace stepped out into the lights. The room was larger than she expected, rows upon rows, faces lit by phone screens and soft stage glow. She took a breath. 5 years ago, she began, I was a secretary. I printed agendas. I brought coffee to men who forgot my name. There was a murmur of surprise. But then something changed, she continued, not just in my life, but in the way I saw the world. I saw waste where there could be balance. I saw silence where there could be systems. And I saw what happens when the smallest players are left behind. She clicked to the first slide, a photo of a tiny roadside produce stand in rural Georgia, marked by an old tarp and a handwritten sign. That vendor, she said, doubled his revenue last quarter using Clear Harvest. Not because of magic, but because someone finally built software that spoke his language. Applause, and I built it, she said softly, with a baby sleeping beside me, in a garage with a cracked window, using Wi-Fi that didn't always work. The applause grew louder. She didn't look for Christopher in the crowd, but she felt him. Meanwhile, in row 4, Christopher Blake sat frozen. He hadn't recognized her name on the schedule. Too busy, too distracted, until the first slide, until the voice. Grace Ellison. The woman he once gave a check to, hoping she'd vanish quietly. Now standing under spotlights. With a product, with applause. He didn't move, didn't blink. And when she said secretary, the man beside him turned subtly in his seat, just enough to notice the sudden pale in Christopher's face. After the speech, Grace stepped off stage into a small sea of handshakes and congratulations. Beautifully said. Powerful message. Can we talk investments? She smiled, nodded, moved through the small crowd with grace and gratitude. And then, the real twist. Lily, who had been drawing in the front row, had slipped away during the applause. She wandered toward the booths, past people and name tags and polished shoes. She stopped at the Blake and River booth. A woman with a clipboard leaned down. "Hey there, sweetie. Are you lost?" Lily shook her head. "I'm looking for someone." She pulled a folded paper from her backpack. It was the drawing. 3 stick figures again. Me, Mommy, and someone missing. She held it up high. "Have you seen him?" Heads turned, including one that hadn't turned in years. Children have a way of saying what adults spend years trying to bury. Lily had always been observant, quiet in her questions, but unshakably curious. So when she saw the man from Mommy's secret picture standing behind a booth with bright lights and polished banners, something in her little heart stirred. She didn't know his name, only that he had the same sharp eyes and straight mouth as the sketch Mommy kept tucked in her desk drawer, the one Grace thought she'd hidden well. But children feel more than they understand, and Lily felt something missing. She tightened the straps on her tiny dinosaur backpack, pulled out her folded crayon drawing, and walked with purpose down the crowded aisle of the convention hall. Vendors and executives passed without noticing. People too busy looking at screens to see a child holding a paper full of truth. She stopped in front of the Blake and River Foods booth. 3 men sat inside, speaking in low tones over coffee and digital pamphlets. Lily walked up to the table and waited. Christopher Blake looked up from his tablet, at first annoyed, assuming a child had wandered off from a daycare tour. But then their eyes met, hers round, bright, full of question, his guarded, unsure, beginning to see something he wasn't prepared for. "I drew something," she said quietly, unfolding the paper. "It's me, Mommy, and someone missing." She placed the paper on the table like a sacred offering. Christopher stared at the drawing. Crayon lines, stick arms, 1 tall figure, 1 small, and a 3rd standing apart, marked only with a faint gray outline. "Mommy keeps a picture like this too," Lily continued, "but with a real face. I think it looks like you." The room went still. The other 2 men at the table slowly looked between Lily and Christopher. No one one said a word. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Grace appeared seconds later. She had seen Lily slip away and followed, her heels clicking softly across the convention carpet. She didn't rush, didn't yank Lily away. She walked with the calm of someone who had made peace with a wound long ago. "Lily," she said, her voice warm but firm. "There you are." Lily turned, looking up. "Mommy." I showed him. Grace nodded. "I see." Christopher stood slowly. "Grace," he started. She raised one hand, not in anger, but in finality. "There's nothing to say," she replied, her voice steady. She only asked a question. He looked down at the crayon drawing. His fingers hovered just above it, but didn't touch. Lily watched him for a beat longer, then walked back to her mother, slipping her small hand into Grace's. They turned and left the booth. No drama, no public scene. Just a question hung in the air, heavier than any product pitch ever could be. Later that afternoon, Grace was called to speak in a breakout session, an unscheduled appearance due to the buzz around her earlier keynote. The panel topic was Tech for Human Good. She brought Lily with her. The room was smaller, more intimate. A few dozen people sat in folding chairs, sipping lukewarm coffee, scanning event apps. When Grace stepped up, she didn't hold a slide clicker or a microphone. She held Lily's hand. "I wasn't always a founder," she began. "I was a secretary. I was a single mother. I was someone who coded after midnight and hoped the lights would stay on long enough to save." A few people shifted forward in their seats. Most days, I wasn't building a company. I was building courage. One diaper, one grocery receipt, one debug line at a time. She paused, then held up the folded crayon drawing. "This is Lily's picture. Me, her, and someone missing." The room grew still. "I used to think that missing parts of our stories were shameful," she continued, "that we had to hide them to move forward. But here's what I've learned. The past shows up, whether we're ready or not, and the children we protect with silence, they carry louder questions." She looked at her daughter. "This is Lily. She's 5, and she's the future we tried to hide. But now she's showing up anyway." A long pause. Then someone clapped. Then another and another, until the room filled with something louder than applause recognition. At the very back of the room, hidden behind a tall plant near the exit door, Christopher Blake stood. He hadn't followed her into the room, but he had found his way there anyway. He didn't speak, didn't make himself known, but he heard every word. And when Grace looked up one final time toward the plant, toward the door, she didn't flinch. She simply breathed out once, then gathered her daughter, and left the room standing taller than when she'd entered. Christopher didn't speak that day, but his silence said more than enough. The woman they once fired now had a name people didn't forget. It began quietly, the way most big things do. A short article in a tech digest, a podcast episode titled Garage Code Grace. Then, one spring morning, Clear Harvest was announced as the winner of the National Food Innovation Prize, a prestigious award given to startups creating real-world impact. Grace hadn't expected it. She didn't prepare a speech. But when she stepped on stage to accept the award, wearing the same navy dress she wore to every speaking event, the applause was long and loud. The next week, her face was on the cover of Forbes Women. The headline read, "From Forgotten to Founder Grace Ellison's Rise in Rural Tech." There were interviews, panels, requests from schools to speak to young girls about STEM. Still, she kept her circles small. Reporters began asking questions about Lily. Is she the inspiration behind the company? Will she follow in your footsteps? "Do you think being a mother made you a better CEO?" Grace answered carefully. "She's the reason I kept going," she'd say. "But she's also just a child, and I want her to stay that way." Photos of Grace were everywhere, but pictures of Lily rare. Just one surfaced, taken by a journalist at a community garden event. In it, Lily wore overalls and red boots, holding a watering can too big for her hands. Her curls framed her face, and she was laughing. That single photo was shared over 100,000 times. But Grace asked quietly and firmly that it not be reused. She never posted Lily online. No birthday videos, no first day of school snapshots, no interviews about parenting. Grace believed some things didn't need applause to matter. They moved into a house a few miles outside Austin, not big, but filled with windows. Sunlight spilled across wooden floors every morning. Lily had her own room with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and a shelf full of dinosaur figurines. The backyard had a lemon tree and a hammock where Grace sometimes worked in the late afternoons. Laptop balanced on her knees while Lily drew with chalk on the patio. They grew herbs in mason jars, made pancakes on Sundays, laughed about silly things like how the toaster always burned the second slice. Life wasn't flashy, but it was whole. One morning, as Grace stirred her coffee and Lily practiced tying her shoes, the mail arrived, a thick envelope, return address, the New York Times. Inside was a draft of a feature article. The headline read, "From the storage room to the boardroom, the dignity of Grace Ellison." It opened with a line that stopped her breath. Grace Ellison built more than software. She built space for voices that had long been ignored. The article detailed her journey. From Charleston to Asheville, from fired to founder, but it didn't sensationalize. It honored. It spoke of resilience without pity, success without ego. And right there, in the center column, was a quote that Grace would read over and over for days. Her company connects food to tables, but more than that, it reconnects dignity to work and purpose to those who've been left behind. She closed the envelope and pressed it to her chest. Outside, Lily shouted from the garden, "Mommy, the lemon's turning yellow." Grace smiled. Yes. Things were ripening. That evening, after Lily was asleep, curled around her favorite stuffed triceratops, Grace sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper folded beside her tea. The silence was warm. She didn't think about the headlines, or the awards, or the men who once overlooked her name on a resume. She thought of one thing: how far you can go when you decide not to disappear. But to Lily, she was just Mommy. And that was more than enough. One night broke her. Another night built her. The years had passed softly, not without their weight, but gently, like waves smoothing the edge of a stone. Lily had grown into a bright, grounded young woman. She still had the same gray eyes, still asked bold questions, but now she asked them with compassion. On her 17th birthday, after dinner and cake, she sat beside her mother on the old porch swing behind their house. Fireflies flickered in the tall grass. She held a mug of tea in her hands and looked out toward the lemon tree. "Mom," she said quietly, "can I ask something real?" Grace looked up from her knitting. "Always." Lily hesitated, then asked what had been slowly blooming in her heart for years. "Did you ever love him?" "My dad." The question wasn't angry, wasn't accusing, just honest. Grace didn't flinch, didn't look away. She let out a long breath, folded her hands in her lap, and nodded. "Yes," she said softly. But it wasn't the kind of love that stays. It was the kind that teaches. Lily looked down, thoughtful. Grace reached over and tucked a loose curl behind her daughter's ear. "Some people give you joy," she said. "Some give you pain. But sometimes pain plants seeds." Lily's eyes glistened, not from sadness, but understanding. "And from that seed," Grace added, "something beautiful grew." Christopher Blake never reached out. Not when Grace's company was acquired in a graceful merger. Not when Lily won a statewide science competition. Not even when Grace's name appeared beside his in an article titled "Leaders Who Changed the Industry." His silence had become a kind of answer. Not cruel, just hollow. But Grace had made peace with that long ago. Because sometimes closure isn't a door slamming shut. It's a gentle hand choosing not to knock again. The house they lived in had grown with them. The backyard now held raised garden beds, tomatoes, basil, squash. On weekends, Grace and Lily planted together, shoulders brushing, laughter rising with the sun. They didn't talk about the past much, not because it hurt, but because they had already lived through it. And now they were busy living something better. One evening in early spring, Grace opened the bottom drawer of her old desk, the one Lily never explored. Inside was a sealed envelope, unsent, unstamped. It was the letter she had once written to Christopher, years ago, after Lily's first birthday. A letter filled with truth, vulnerability, and a kind of grace she no longer needed to give. She held it for a moment, then smiled, and quietly tore it in half. Some words, she decided, were never meant to be delivered. Some stories didn't need another chapter. They just needed an ending. Later that evening, Lily found her mother in the garden, kneeling beside a bed of young lettuce. "Need help?" Grace looked up, always. Lily knelt beside her, dug her hands into the soil. They worked in silence, the kind only love can hold. As the sun dipped low, casting gold over their shoulders, Grace turned to her daughter. "You know," she said, "I used to think my life ended the night he let me go." Lily looked over, hands still in the dirt. But it didn't. Grace continued. It just changed direction, like roots finding their way around stone. A pause. "Some nights hurt," she said, "but others heal, and the legacy isn't the man, it's you. It's this. Right here." Lily smiled. "I like our garden better than boardrooms anyway." Grace laughed, a soft, full sound that echoed into the twilight. She reached over, took her daughter's soil-covered hand, and held it. And together, they planted something new. And from that seed, something beautiful grew. Life has a way of breaking us in the quietest moments. Sometimes, it isn't loud betrayal or tragedy. It's the silence after we're dismissed, the door quietly closing behind us, the moment we realize no one is coming to help. Grace's journey reminds us that dignity doesn't come from job titles or someone else's approval. It's built in the dark, when we choose to keep going, even when we feel forgotten. Many of us, especially as we grow older, carry scars from choices made long ago. Regrets, lost chances, or people who walked away. But what if healing isn't about forgetting? What if it's about growing something new from what was broken? Grace didn't chase revenge. She chose to rebuild with grace, for herself and for her child. And in doing so, she teaches us this. Our past may shape us, but it doesn't define us. The most beautiful legacies often begin in pain, but grow through quiet strength. So wherever you are in your journey, know this. It's never too late to begin again. Thank you for spending your time with us and letting this story into your heart. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of something real, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life. And who knows, The next one might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. From our heart to yours, thank you. Until next time, take care.